care about current affairs, it's on the Oshow. And when you want to get clear what's going on here, it's on the Oshow. If you like to stay in the know, tune yourself into the Oshow. It's the Oshow. Laura Babcock.
Welcome to the Oshow, Canada's current affairs podcast with strong opinions. And we've got some great shows this week for you in Podland. First of all, we have our scandal panel coming up. It's a big hit. And honestly, with all the stuff that Doug Ford is doing, I can't believe how much we have to talk about today. Not the least of which is his 5 months. Is it 5 months vacation? And his decision to become what? A king by selecting a giant cabinet at the cost of 10 million of our tax dollars. We'll get into all the latest obnoxious scandals of Doug Ford and figure out what the hell's going on in Ontario. But also, we have coming up on the Oshow podcast, Marit Stiles. She is the leader of the official opposition. And she said the quiet part out loud again this week, but finally, the media listened. She called Doug Ford corrupt. And when the media balked, the traditional media, she said, I've said it many times, and if he wants to sue me, bring it, because then we can find out what's going on in Discovery, right? So she called out Ford. We're going to have here on the podcast on Thursday. So if you haven't already subscribed to the Oshow, either on YouTube or you can do it on Apple Podcasts now, Spotify, wherever you get your great pods, let's get right to the conversation I think we've all been waiting for since we heard that Doug Ford and his giant cabinet were just going to take their gravy train. And as I'm calling it now, the gravy train is a wreck. They are taking it right into, I don't know where, and we as a province, as a country, have to figure out what to do about it. Joining me here on the podcast are Keith Leslie and Mark Cripps, otherwise known as the Scandal Panel. Guys, what was your reaction when you saw that Doug Ford wasn't just putting Queen's Park into a summer holiday season? He was going to extend it all the way until October 21st, I believe. Almost 5 months. 5 months when there are swirling scandals, huge deals on the table, millions of our dollars, billions of our dollars in play, and no chance at accountability with this guy. Like, Keith, does he think himself a king? What is going on?
Well, he's certainly acting like one, isn't he, when he's going to adjourn the legislature, not just a week early, which is almost predictable, but then to lop 4 or 5 weeks off the other end and not come. You're supposed to come back basically a week after Labor Day. Now it's going to come back just before Halloween. And you mentioned a few items there. Of course, this is a government that doesn't want to be in the legislature every day facing questions about the Greenbelt Scandal, the RCMP investigation, the overcrowded emergency departments, the fact you can't get a hospital bed, the no doctor available, all these sorts of things. They would much rather not be in there taking daily hits on that. And you mentioned Marit Stiles, the NDP, the official opposition leader, calling Doug Ford corrupt and daring him to sue. She went outside the legislative chamber to do that. She didn't just do it in the chamber where you have immunity from lawsuits. She went outside, no protection there. And she said, basically, as you said, bring it. She really hopes that, an actual court case would get to more details and actual facts of what's going on in so many of these scandals that we've discussed going along. But the fact that he appointed, again, a 36-member cabinet, the biggest and most expensive cabinet in Ontario history, at a time when it's 2018, Doug talked about reducing the size and cost of government. He's got the most expensive premier's office and the largest in history, the most expensive cabinet and largest in history. And he really didn't change that much in cabinet. Most of the front bench is staying put. There's a few promotions to these associate minister positions. But what it basically means is that virtually every member, I think there's only one of the 80 members of the PC caucus, get extra pay because they're either a parliamentary assistant, an associate minister now, or an actual cabinet minister. But in the end, so I don't see why the cabinet needed such a long time to get up to speed on issues when so few have changed. And the only two real significant changes were on the front bench itself when Todd Smith and Stephen Lecce switched education and energy and electrification. Those two, that's interesting. We can talk about that later. But why would the rest of the cabinet need that long to get up to speed? This is all about, as you said, avoiding accountability.
So, Mark,
It's
when I
ins-
saw that it was a $10 million price tag this morning, I think I tweeted out, like, what does Ford think? He's king? He's giving titles to his court. So, and then giving them 4 months off. He's literally, is he buying their loyalty going into an early election? He doesn't feel he's responsible to the people outside of his court, to the rest of us, to the poor people who are like on the steps of Queen's Park, to the people who are having to literally beg all over this province for food. I mean, I talked to a woman in an encampment that was getting moved, and she said, well, if I'm put somewhere outside of the downtown core, I won't eat because I won't have the traffic to beg for my food. I mean, what the hell is happening? Does Ford think himself king?
Well, I mean, this is this is a pattern we've seen, especially for the last few years, where Ford has decided to bestow the riches of the land upon the lords and ladies of his house. And this only strengthens the argument from opposition that this government is built for insiders. Who is more of an insider than the people elected to represent the PC government? So I think as well, one of the things I think there's a, with a potential for an early election, this government is going to spend the next 5 months fundraising like crazy. And if you look at the most recent fundraising announcements, I mean, everybody's fundraising $1,000, $1,000, $1,000. It's easier to get $1,000 if you're a minister or an associate minister, right? So now you create 36 positions that now it's not your like Donna Skelly. No one's paying $1,000 to go talk to Donna Skelly, but they will pay $1,000 now to go see Sam Oosterhoff because he's an insider, because he is now an associate minister. So this creates this whole move, in my mind, is using the public dime to further increase the amount of revenue that this government can raise to fight this upcoming early election. The opposition, if you look at the recent data, the PCs have like out fundraised both the Liberals and the NDP by like twofold. So they are stocking their coffers. The next 5 months, I think, will be all about raising money and strategy, getting ready for an early election. Doug Ford's afraid of the federal election. He's afraid of a Poilievre government. He wants to get in front of it. We are in election mode right now, and the election is coming. So that's what strikes me, and more than anything, what angers me is, how true fiscal conservatives can watch what is happening with this government, and the same people who argued against Wynne and every other and the federal Liberals and the spending spree and high taxes and record deficits, and how do they reconcile with what they're seeing? Is it just okay if our guys do it?
Well,
right?
I love having you here on the Scandal panel with your government inside knowledge, because honestly, as cynical as I can be, I had not thought that his extending cabinet was just to extend his fundraising potential over the next 4 months of the barbecue and the VIP dinner circuit. Like, that is so craven. It makes me sick. The idea that he's spending 10 million of our dollars that could be going into healthcare, could be going into keeping ERs open, could be going into feeding people who are experiencing homelessness, could be going into so many pressing issues, affordable housing, shelters, all the things we know we need in this province. 10 million goes a long way for a little charity who does great work on the front lines, let me tell you. So that $10 million he's just throwing into an extra large, super large cabinet to do what? To fundraise for? I mean...
Another thing, Laura, to consider is that, with all of these new cabinet jobs comes more staff. So then you have a greater amount of staff. So they're going to have to hire people.
Right.
And what do those people do? Those people are being hired to be involved in the next campaign. They are soldiers. So we are using taxpayers' dollars to bring in new people to all these cabinet offices, these associate ministers and these ministers' offices, because 36, holy shit, like you gotta find a whole bunch more people to work these offices and staff these offices. And they all get their marching orders. They will all be forced to be involved in fundraising, in campaign preparedness, in working, knocking in signs, working. They'll all be assigned to various campaign jobs within the election. Like he's also using our money to bolster his election readiness team, which is
Okay,
the
so you've just extended my king analogy then, because not only has he extended his court, and his courtesans are all his loyal subjects, and they go out and help collect taxes from their feudal kingdom, whatever.
Yeah.
The feudal lords and ladies, the lords are collecting taxes from the people, the fundraising element that you've discussed. But you also brought up the term that this extended hiring is building his soldiers for the election. Let me go to you, Keith, on this. When I'm listening to Mark, I feel like I'm listening to some of my favorite American pods that talk about, the normies, the conservatives who have been watching this MAGA movement kind of get rid of all past convention and vestiges of conservatism and fiscal responsibility. And they are just throwing money all over the place, taking money, grifting, doing all of this stuff. And it's like they're still sitting in shock going, how is it that fiscal conservatives can be okay in any way with the overspending that Trump was doing and the way that he's spending from the RNC fundraising for his campaign and his legal things? I mean, how are conservatives just acclimatized to that in the US? And listening to Mark here in Ontario, it sounds the same.
Where are the fiscal
where are they?
Where are the fiscal conservatives in Ontario? I mean, seriously, if they're there, they're supporting this government because, as Mark pointed out, they're holding, I think, one night, $5,000 a head fundraisers in different parts of the province. Every minister, junior minister, associate minister, and actual minister is out fundraising like mad. It's absolutely insane. But where are the fiscal conservatives? Why are they putting this money down? Why are they still backing this government? They're spending more than the Kathleen Wynne government ever did. The debt to GDP ratio, just the overall government spending, the program spending is going way, way up, even though the revenues are up as well. The deficit, a $10 billion deficit this year. Fiscal conservatives are still paying $1,000 a head to rub shoulders with people who are running a $10 billion deficit.
So is it because, like, I'm thinking of the Trump scenario, and he was a huge spending president in 2016. Like, he brought their debt up like insane. They're in the trillions. But part of it was his deregulation. So, I mean, is that the appeal? The fact that he'll give away the Greenbelt land, the fact that he's got all that land around the 413 to build out, the fact that, the Spacino at Ontario Place, as Gil Penalosa called it, a casino with assurance last week, or last time we had it on the pod, an amazing episode. If people haven't listened to that yet, you got to listen to Gil, because he holds no holds barred with Gil Penalosa on Doug Ford and the mayors. But I mean, this idea, is that why these so-called fiscal conservatives are spending all this money on a government that wastes tax dollars so egregiously and blows up big government so exponentially? Is it because he's going to give them access to some of his schemes, because he's going to give them deregulate our environment protections and all the rest, so that these developers can go out and create their own, as we heard on a podcast recently, their own urban boundary? I mean, like, is that what the appeal is, Keith?
Well, who's coming back? Not just into cabinet, but coming back as the government House leader. Why, look, is former housing minister, who had to resign in the Greenbelt Scandal, Steve Clark. He's coming back as government House leader to push through the government's priorities. And the government House leader also, usually, quite often, takes the questions in the legislature that Doug Ford, the premier, does not want to take. So here, he sat out, 6-7 months in the penalty box for a program that, was clearly not just flawed, it was corrupt. I mean, people got favoritism, and their lands were worth billions of dollars when before they'd been worth millions. We all know this was wrong. He fell on his sword, as did his chief of staff. They were both out. Now he's back as government House leader. And where are his connections? He was municipal affairs and housing minister. He knows every local politician all across Ontario. Now he's the government House leader again for the PC. So his time in the penalty box for the Greenbelt Scandal was pretty darn short, really. They can say this isn't a cabinet position, but it's still a very powerful position. And it's a sign to all those people that were working with Mr. Clark in his office so well behind the scenes, that maybe we'll be able to work with this government after all. Going forward.
Well, you know what?
It's absolutely, it's cynical as hell. I'm sorry.
Well, but I mean, just because I want to extend this reference, because it seems to be fitting as we go on. I mean, part of what, and yes, Trump they are saying now on clips that they want to just have a king because Trump would be that guy and his family would be a perfect royal family. Like it's actually being said to the media in the US. But part of what Trump did was pardon his buddies who got in jams, right? In his first administration. When they got jammed up, he pardoned them and sent a signal that, you know, you can be put in the penalty box. In their case, it was legally, but there's an RCMP investigation. So we'll find out whether the housing minister at the time of the Greenbelt scandal is in any kind of legal trouble. But the point is, there's the pardon, right? There's this sense of if you do the bidding of the king, you know, I'll sit you out for a little bit, but you're welcome back into my court, which builds loyalty, which builds a sense of invincibility, Mark, a sense of no accountability at all.
100%. I mean, this is, you know, the most cynical thing for me in the last week was, you know, reading the comments from former conservative MPPs when Kathleen Wynne increased the size of cabinet to 30. And again, you know, having worked in that government at the time, I knew exactly what was going on. They were moving out some of the older guard that were, you know, probably not going to run again or who, and then replacing them with fresh new faces. It wasn't about ability or quality. It was about putting people in place that could be a minister in a key riding in the next election, because there's something about someone being a minister and it kind of affects the voters. You know, well, I don't want to vote out a minister. Like, he or she is our, you know, our path to the government decision-making process, right? So, you know, yeah, I was cynical about that as someone who worked in the government. I'm like, oh my God, like, and then, you know, so, you know, I try to see things like for what they are. So when you see what happened last week, and I'm just like, where are the conservatives? Where are those critics? Where are those people who really truly care about fiscal responsibility, about, you know, holding down the debt and deficit? I get it. Like, you know, austerity, nobody wants austerity, but conservatives are supposed to be the ones that rein everything in, right-size government, make smaller government. That's their big mantra.
Well,
Smaller government.
forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think that's actually been disproven that they
Oh, I know.
It
100%.
absolutely has.
yeah, it's been
It's a
disproven.
myth.
That's a myth. That's a myth that they've cleverly owned, just like the Conservative Party in the US used to cleverly own fiscal responsibility and family values. I mean, whatever, right? I mean, out the window. So we have to disavow ourselves and stop using those myths. Go ahead, Keith.
I was just going to say, there's another example of the king setting his own rules. Ford's current chief of staff was caught red-handed, basically using his own government or his own personal Gmail account to do government business again. The Ford's chief of staff. This is exactly what basically got other people fired and what led to a previous cabinet minister resign. Now, Premier Ford says that's not a problem because it's all duplicated on the public or on the government servers as well. No. I mean, you may declare it that way if you wish, but the law is pretty specific and does not have an exemption for, well, we'll duplicate whatever we do on our personal Gmails on the government account, okay? Wink. No, it's absolutely not okay. Your government using code words and personal Gmail accounts with developers into government offices, into the Premier's office, for God's sakes. And he's now just saying, well, that's okay. It's absolutely not okay. And he's just defending his chief of staff, keeping him in position, and basically saying, I'm the Premier. I say it's okay as long as it's duplicated on the public. How do we know everything's duplicated? You can't. It's just ridiculous in the first place.
Didn't people go to jail for that, Mark?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think what's happening here is that I think Ford is waiting to see what the Integrity Commissioner's report comes out before it cans the guy. You know, and I think that will be, it's sort of like, well, if I can the guy now, I'm admitting guilt, right? So if I let see what the Integrity Commissioner says, and then we'll make the decision then. That's what I can. But, you know, another one that caught me today was the FOI on the LCBO paper bags. And I'm like, here's another one of the king in a moment of populist kind of whatever rage, emails the head of the LCBO and says, I want the paper bags brought back.
On a Sunday night. On a Sunday night email.
On a Sunday night. And everybody's like, the king thus decree that paper bags will be returned to the LCBO after they had gone through the whole process of managing this, exiting out of the paper bag for environmental reasons, because the bags they used were not recycled bags. They were actually you know, they weren't recycled material. So the LCBO was trying to reduce its carbon footprint and its environmental footprint. And then in a moment on a Sunday night, Doug Ford sends an email to the head of the LCBO demanding that he put paper bags back in. And to see the reaction of the LCBO executives are like, you know, it's like, well, the king says so. So I guess like it's so.
Well, and the Sun had the story. That was
Yeah.
it. So they were in the corner. We got to get those bags in the stores like tomorrow. Because the Sun's got the story already.
That's right. Yeah.
You know, so that's propaganda. I mean, you know what I mean? Like the point being that he can come out with whatever he wants, an email at night, sending it out, reversing policy of a government, like the whole booze and corner stores at a $1 billion price tag because he wants to go ahead, have an early election and pay some cancellation fees. You know, who benefits from using our tax dollars to pay out those fees? Why do we need to have the stuff in the corner stores early so that he can win another election? I mean, I'd forgotten, honestly, about the stupid bag thing. And I mean, the emails, right? The secret emails. What about those secret phones that the cabinet ministers were using in those months where they didn't have stuff on their official phone records? I mean, there are investigations coming out, guys, on the Ontario Place thing. There's supposed to be a special AG thing coming out on that. We heard from the guys from Ontario Place for All. We've got the RCMP, if they ever get around to ever giving us an update on the Greenbelt Scandal, would be kind of nice before the freaking election. But whatever else they're coming out with these FOIs from the opposition parties trying to get information. I feel like he's a guy who's trying to outrun 15 of these different winding scandals that are coming up behind him. And he knows that if he just builds a giant cabinet, spends 10 million of our dollars to do it, creates himself a fundraising army, and then an election army, he can come back and get another majority while people in Ontario languish in hallways, while his private sector pals are getting 3 times more for their private nursing agencies, making a fortune on these unsafe LRTs. And all of us are these long-term care homes, LTCs, and we are sitting here as a province and we're watching it happen. I mean, Gil Panalosa said on the Oshow on the last pod, he's like, do we have honey in our blood, in our veins instead of blood? Like, why were we not out on the streets, every single city in this province, when Doug Ford decided to spend billions on an unnecessary subway instead of what he could have done with a ton of LRTs and a ton of bike lanes? In other words, we continue to sit by while this would-be king squanders our taxes and gives it to his wealthy friends, his private sector pals, his freaking court. And what are we going to do about it, Ontario?
Even worse, he's still polling over 40%. He's still polling in majority government territory. That's pretty discouraging for an awful lot of people who are very, very concerned about this government, but it's not concerning for Doug Ford and the Conservatives. That's why they basically we can take a 19-week break now, come back with a very short session. They'll probably prorogue and come back with the new throne speech, a very short session. And then apparently we're headed for an election in the spring of 2025 because Doug Ford doesn't want to have Pierre Poilievre eat all his carbon tax. You know, people may not know that Doug Ford, I mean, he just rails constantly about the carbon tax. It's not just Pierre Poilievre. Doug Ford's been on this for a long, long time. In fact, every question and question period asked by a Conservative member is usually handwritten, and it's always every day, all their questions, and they get as many as the opposition and then some, because there's only one opposition party that gets to ask questions every day. The others are handed out, doled out one at a time. Every question is on the carbon tax, and they actually call her Queen Bonnie now. They don't even say Queen of the carbon tax, but they've just gone so far and are just blatantly campaigning in the legislature every day against the carbon tax, and which is, of course, Pierre Poilievre's signature thing right now as well. So that's why apparently this is the motivation. Toronto Star says is the big motivation behind Doug Ford's wanting to get that election out early. He wants to fight the carbon tax himself, not have to let Poilievre mow that grass and fight it and have him fight a federal election or a provincial election on a different issue. This is his issue. He always feels that. So they're going to just plow ahead. Remember, the biggest thing from the last session was the beer. And the beer was not done in the legislature. It was done just by fight. Again, he just, negotiated a $250 billion deal with the beer store, added in another few $100 million for fees and whatnot. It'll be kicked back, and perhaps a few $100 million more. We're not sure because we've not seen the details of this deal or the Ontario Place deal.
And he just canceled the $1 billion committee for fixing Queen's Park. Where's that cash going to go, Keith?
Well, It's better if you keep a close eye on this in hand and disband those committees that are responsible for, because can you imagine the amount of money they're going to spend to completely overhaul the legislature? First of all, to build a temporary legislature offsite with enough staff for, 500 or so, as well as a legislative chamber. In Ottawa, they had a few other parliamentary buildings, including the West Block, they could work with. This, no, not so much. So unless it's going into Hard House or something, I don't know anyway, the amount of money that could be spent on this, and they've just disbanded.
Well, we can't trust him. We can't trust him with this money. We can't trust him with getting rid of committees.
He could get a really close deal, though. He could get a good deal. Let's face it, because there's, the 95-year lease for the spa at Ontario Place. Well, wait, we don't know if it's a good deal because we can't get any damn details.
Right.
And with every other, so this is again.
Bill did the math on that, and he talked about the size of that building, the cost to heat it and maintain it. Says it's the size of BMO Stadium. There's no way a spa could make the kind of revenue it's going to take to finance Ontario Place with this secret deal. It's obviously a casino from his urban planning expert perspective. No better place to launder money, no better place to pay off your pals than to run a casino. But I just want to end on this with you, Mark, because I feel sometimes, I don't know about you guys, but there's so much Ford scandal. It's like Steve Bannon said in the US, just flood the zone with bullshit. They flood us with so many scandals that even the scandal panel here on the Oshow loses track of all the things that have happened since we saw each other like 14 days ago or whatever it was. Like, it's bananas, right? And it's nonstop. But Mark, I want to end with you because you're a comms pro like me. And when I see the message discipline that Keith was just talking about in Queen's Park, where Ford pivots every question at Queen's Park question period into something about the tax, axe the tax, trying to own that ground because he knows it's populist gold, right? When I see that level of messaging discipline, when I see the fact that they avoid scrutiny, that they're always on message together, and then I look at the NDP merit styles is swinging for sure, but their parties had their own internecine things, and their message is not nearly as hammered home as the Conservatives. Bonnie, I have offered for her to come on the Oshow. I still haven't heard back from her office. She needs to get out there and start to do this, because Conservatives, whether they are Ontario Conservatives, Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives, or the MAGA Conservatives in the US, they are messaging discipline juggernauts. And if the opposition parties think that they're going to have the ability to catch up and catch the narrative, I think they're foolish. They should be out on every pod doing advertising on every single podcast and YouTube space and everywhere that the Ford campaign is. The Ford campaign has made Bonnie Queen Bonnie, Carbon Queen. They say she's too expensive. She hasn't even gotten started. And we know that he is far too expensive. They are labeling her. They are projecting and deflecting and doing everything out of the Trump playbook. And Poilievre does the same damn thing. What the hell is wrong with your party that they don't have Bonnie out doing shows like this and everywhere else? I mean, at least Merritt gets it. Why hasn't Bonnie? Forget about me. It's not about me. Like, get out there.
I think, well, Laura, I think the opposition parties are starting to get the message. I think Merritt last week calling Doug corrupt was a really strong message. If you see, I read today that both the Liberal and NDP parties have triggered their election readiness groups. They're going out. They want to get candidates out there. So it can't just be Bonnie. It needs to be candidates in every riding, speaking to their local papers. So yes, you are absolutely right. I think we're in a position where nobody knew. This whole early election thing has now, people were just kind of waiting because they have limited resources. They have limited resources and limited access.
No, but I don't buy that bullshit. It's 2024. There's no more excuse to not do tons of free media. They can have their own podcast.
Right.
They can do tons
Absolutely.
and tons of stuff for nothing. And there are podcasts lined up in this province that would talk to them. So you know what? And when we put out an Oshow clip, like, it gets 10, 20,000 views. So we're in 37 countries. That is not an excuse. That's something you could say in 2015, Mark. But in 2024, I take that as total bullshit. Sorry.
Well, Merritt gets it.
On them.
Merritt gets it. She's coming on your show. Bonnie should come on your show. I mean, use every avenue you can to speak to people about what we are seeing and create the conditions, the messaging. Use these opportunities to cut your messaging, to test stuff out, to see what resonates with people, to see how you can formulate your strategy. Because the fact of the matter is that the Liberals and the NDP are going to fight this next election with not even close to the amount of resources that the Tories have. They are going to be able to flood every channel. TV, they're doing it right now. They're spending money right now.
I can't go for a bloody manicure without listening to how Queen Bonnie's too expensive.
Right.
It comes on during the Spotify.
100%. So I mean, you're right. Like they need to get off their ass and use whatever free resources they can, whatever channels they can to start getting out there. But more than anything, I think it's about crafting a message. You need to find the winning formula. Don't worry about what Doug's calling you. Worry about what you're going to say to the people about him. And we need to find that sweet spot. So
I feel
her reaction.
Go ahead, Keith. Last word to you. Go ahead.
In her reaction to the cabinet shuffle, she did test drive a couple new sayings. One of them was, this Ford drives in reverse. Then she didn't set up any reversals by the government. So it kind of just hang there. And the other one was, they call me the queen of the carbon tax. He's the king, or he's the father of the carbon. Like, just ignore the carbon tax.
Dumb.
So she needs some smarter people in the room to craft some better messages. But your point earlier, Laura, is they're up against people. That's all they have is slogans. So of course they're real good at sticking a message when you've only got 6-word messaging. You know, it's just sloganeering. It's very easy to stay on message.
So three word, axe the tax, right? Yeah. Jail, not bail. I mean, it's 3-word messages. It's Trump, build that wall. Like we've seen this playbook since 2016. And I'm so sick and tired of watching the center and the left completely get plowed over by the messaging discipline by conservative parties in North America. And now we're seeing, of course, in the European Union and everywhere else. The fact of the matter is they own the online world. They own the bots. They own the podcasts. They are much louder, much more effective. And you know why? Because they don't sit around and wait for some fucking genius to come up with the magical formula for what they all should say. They're constantly throwing things at the wall to see what sticks. And I do that with the Oshow. Some of my tweets go viral immediately. I know what words work. I don't understand why they're not in the fucking game. I really don't. So I'm hoping that they're learning, but I get very frustrated when I see a party take my money for scandal and to profit their pals while they're impoverishing my neighbors. I'm so sick of it. And if they're not going to hang their heads in collective shame, then it's up to the people of Ontario to force these other parties to get in the game and to do the hard work that we've all been doing to keep Ford accountable for his corruption. Thank you both for all the great work that you do. I am mad. I am mad.
Thanks for having us. Glad you're mad.
I can't wait to talk to Merritt Stiles. I have a feeling she's probably as pissed off as we all are. It's going to be a hell of an Oshow on Thursday. Thank you to the Scandal panel, Keith Leslie, Mark Cripps. And as I said, subscribe on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, because we're doing some of the heavy lifting around here to hold Ford to account. We appreciate the support, and thank you all so much.
When you care about current affairs, it's on the Oshow. And when you want to get clear what's going on here, it's on the Oshow. If you like to stay in the know, tune yourself into the Oshow. It's the Oshow. Laura Babcock's the Oshow. With a lot of great guests, she puts them to the test on the Oshow. There's no doubt they'll be calling them out on the Oshow. Stand for something or fall for it all. Ontario, hear the call of the Oshow. It's a podcast, the Oshow. Laura Babcock's the Oshow. Stay informed with the Oshow, Oshow.
Your merch bid.